Welcome to the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility, an ongoing inquiry into Americans' political origins and evolving institutions. Here with us now is the Executive Director and your host, Dr. Bill O'Brien.
This is the Virtual Center for the Study of the U.S. Constitution and Civic Responsibility. It is a Tuesday. It is the day after Memorial Day. And after a 2-week hiatus, it is absolutely wonderful to be here on Head On Radio Network with the Virtual Center. I've been away far too long. And I mentioned in a previous program about, well, one of the most recent programs I did, that during the 5-day hiatus between our last program on a Wednesday and the following Monday, I usually find that I get a little bit nervous after being away for a while. This time I've been away for 2 weeks, so what can I tell you? I am a little bit nervous, but at the same time I am so excited to be back and to be here on the Virtual Center. And I've got a lot to tell you about a lot of different things, and I hope you'll hang in there and let everybody know that you those that you are in communication with, that we are back on the air 3 days a week. We will continue to follow this schedule, and I've had my break. I'm anticipating the possibility of another one, but it won't be one like that one. I'll tell you a little bit about that after we get into the program. First of all, I would like to invite you, as we always do, to participate actively in the program by giving us a call and getting on the air. You can do that. We have a number that is reserved especially to link you to the program and to put you on the air. That number is area code 304-658-3333. That's 304-658-3333. If you'd like to email me directly about issues that we're talking about or issues that may really be bothering you, or issues that you'd like to air, by all means, we would love to hear from you. I would love to hear from you. My email address is waobrien906@gmail.com. That's waobrien906@gmail.com. That's all one word. There's no punctuation in there at all. Well, as I mentioned, Lord, I'm taking cough breaks already. We've only been here with 2 minutes. Anyway, as I mentioned, I've been on the road quite a bit. Put close to 2,500 miles on our automobile, and we drove from West Virginia to Kansas. And we had my wife's grandson graduated from high school last Sunday, in fact. And we had promised him that if he hung in there and graduated, we would make sure we were there. And darn it, we did. We were there. And it was actually a wonderful graduation, and it was so wonderful to see him graduate. He's going to be going to Rutgers this fall on scholarship. He's quite a good student, very honestly, very very bright. And as I mentioned, he and I have become pretty good friends over the months and a few years that we've known each other, and I'm very flattered that he kind of has turned to me for some advice on applying to colleges and those kinds of things. I'm not sure what he's going to major in. I'm not sure that he knows, but anyway, we had told him that if he hung in there and graduated and kept up that grade point, we would make sure that we attended his graduation, and we did that. On the way, we stopped in St. Louis and spent a couple of nights and a full day with a good friend from my graduate school days, Bob Bliss. And some of you may recall seeing him on our history grants. Bob is a colonialist. He's dean of the Honors College at the University of Missouri St. Louis. After he and I left graduate school, I came to West Virginia and he went to Great Britain. and he taught there for 27 years actually, and just came back to the States a few years ago, and we reconnected, and we go back 50 years, and 49 years actually. 1965, fall of 1965 is when we met each other in graduate school for the first time. And Bob is a colonialist and has become a very good friend, and he came regularly to participate in our summer academy programs under two Department of Education history grants that I was fortunate enough to get funded. The first one, written in 2002, began in the summer of 2003, and that was Bob's first appearance here in West Virginia. He came in 2003 and 2004, and I believe 2005. And then I wrote a second grant in 2009, and it began in 2010 and ran through the spring of last spring, 2013. And Bob came 3 of those summers as well. So Bob spent a lot of time here in West Virginia. He knows the grants pretty well. He knows what I've been trying to do, and he's brought a perspective and a level of scholarship to the program, which I kind of knew he would bring, which is the reason I brought him. But he and his wife both have become very, very close friends, and you know, my wife is very comfortable with them. She enjoys them as well. So we went there and spent some time in St. Louis with Bob and Paulette. Then we drove down to Kansas, which I thought was probably 4.5 to 5 hours from St. Louis. Turned out it was closer to 7. So we drove the better part of a full day on Thursday last, and not this past Thursday, but the Thursday before, and you know, spent the better part and got in there late in the afternoon into Independence, Kansas, and then we were there from Thursday night through Tuesday. We left to return to West Virginia last Tuesday morning and returned home on last Wednesday night. So we've put quite a bit of time in. I missed the being on the air. I missed the conversation, and the issues fell a little bit behind in news and various other things. But it is good. It is good to be back. It is good to be home. And as I say, there are a number of things going on that I want to share with you. One of them is an email that I received from Sweden, from our listener Scott in Sweden. And lo and behold, turns out that in exchanging emails over the last couple of days, I learned that Scott holds a master's degree from the University of Kansas. And so he was you know, very interested in the fact that I had traveled to Kansas and wanted to know what part. And you got to be careful what you say, because I've been pretty loose with my conversation about Kansas. You know, and to be very honest with you, it's a little bit hypocritical. Somebody that has spent the last 25 years in southern West Virginia talking about any place else as being, you know, rural and desolate and those kinds of things. But be that as it may, I was sending emails to friends and telling them what it was like to drive through the cornfields and things, and it was all a new experience for me. At one point, I remember sharing an email with a friend and telling him that driving from Joplin, Missouri to Independence, Kansas, which is about an hour and 15 minutes, I think. It's through cornfields, open cornfields. No traffic lights, just stop signs, 4-way stop signs in the middle of cornfields. And all I could think of was Forrest Gump. You know, I kind of expected to stop at one of those one of those stop signs and see Forrest Gumps go flashing by the other way. Didn't happen, but I expected it, and you know, and so I would send emails back to friends and saying, you know, because it was so rural, something that I've never experienced. I had mentioned in a couple of emails to friends that when my wife Wilma and I married, I promised to follow her to the ends of the earth, but I really never expected that she'd take me up on it. And other very hypocritical, sarcastic comments about Kansas. And being that I'm located in southern West Virginia, I realize that's a little bit like the pot calling the pot a pot, if you know what I mean. But anyway, I had spent time in Kansas a number of years ago. I delivered a paper at Wichita State University in Wichita and loved Wichita. I thought it was a beautiful, beautiful community, beautiful town. And Independence is quite small, and it sits in the middle of, about an hour no matter which direction you go, and you have to drive at least an hour before you come to anything resembling a good-sized city or whatever. So anyway, it was a new experience for me, but I enjoyed it. And while I was there, and this is what I wanted to share with you, I went to the White Rose Society here on the internet, which is archiving all of our previous programs. I've never done that before. And part of the reason is I've been developing programs, but I really haven't taken the time to go back and check them out or listen to them again or anything else. And while I was in Kansas, I decided, one thing I had was time, I decided that it might be a good idea to go back through the previous programs and develop a kind of a summary of each one, a synopsis of each one. I didn't do that. As I developed the programs, I just went from day to day to day, and other than knowing, the date that the program was delivered on, that's about all I know. What the topic was, I can't remember. And when I went to the White Rose Society, and I encourage you to do that, and many of you are, I know, picking up the programs on archive. And they are indeed archived at the whiterosesociety.org. And the program, the Dr. Bill O'Brien is listed there, and if you click that, you will get a list by date with the most recent program first of all the programs. And I'll be very honest with you, I was struck by the length of the list. I can't believe that we have recorded as many 2-hour sessions as are listed there. One of the things I learned in listening to previous programs is that we began the Virtual Center here on the H.O.R.N. Radio Network on Monday, March 11th, 2013. Today is the 27th of May, 2014. So effectively, 2 weeks. We're 2 weeks short of 15 months that we've been doing these programs. And I was struck by the number of programs that are archived on the White Rose Society website. So I took to spending some time going back over previous programs and summarizing them. I didn't do that many because, very honestly, I found myself re-listening to the programs, the entire 2-hour programs. I did about 5. Well, of course, if you add that up, that's like 10 hours of listening and summarizing and that kind of thing. So I thought that what I would do is just gradually pick at this as I go and just do a couple, maybe one a day or a couple over the weekends or whatever until I catch up. The other thing that I have decided to do is that each evening after we get off the air, I'm going to do my summary while it's still fresh in my mind, and that way I won't create a situation. We are in the process of developing a website here for the Virtual Center. And on that website, I would like to present, targeted by date, a summary of what each program is about, so that when a listener wants to pick up an archived program, they will know what the topic is. And given the fact that these are 2-hour programs, what I found in listening to them is that it's a little bit difficult to pin down the topic. Because generally, in a 2-hour period, that you tend to move from one issue to the next issue to the next issue. And consequently, the programs can become pretty involved. And so you can't just synopsis and say, this one's on Federalist 10, this one's on the Supreme Court decision in McCulloch versus Maryland or something like that. And so I found that my summaries have had to be a little bit more substantive than that, which is probably good, but a lot more work. But on the other hand, I believe it's worth it. I'm meeting on Thursday about the development of a Virtual Center website. And again, I would like these summaries to be on the website so that people who link into our website will be able to not only go to the date of the program, but get a little bit of an idea as to what the particular program is about. And then if If someone who listened to the program before wants to listen again, the information necessary to do that will be there. For example, I just randomly picked a couple while I was in Kansas. One of them I picked November 25th of last year, 2013. I had no idea what the November 25th program from last year was about, but I listened to it and summarized it, and I have the summary here, and I'm gradually beginning to build a summary of each program. And what I did then is I went back to the ones I can remember, which were the last couple that we did on the issue of the Second Convention. We've done a number of programs on Mark Levin's book, The Liberty Amendments, and on the move towards calling for a constitutional convention, and the issues involved in that and all of that. We've done programming on that for several weeks now, and while that was still fresh, I made it a point to do summaries of the last couple of programs, which were run early in May, the 5th and 6th of May. So in essence, this is the first program here on the 27th of May that we've done since May 6th. We had a few technical difficulties, as many of you will know, and will recall, and but the last programs that we did were on the Second Convention, and I thought, very honestly, I'd share with you today a little bit of the summary that I did in those programs. It'll be a little bit of review as well, and then we can go into it. Which brings me to the email that I received from Scott over this past weekend. And again, when I mentioned to him that I had been in Kansas, he wanted to know what part and told me that he had graduated from the University of Kansas. So immediately it thought to me, shame on me, you need to be a little bit careful what you say, because you never know. I said some pretty sarcastic things about Kansas, my short experience there, and you got to be careful. But I did ask Scott if he minded if I shared with our audience a little bit of the email he sent. It's not nearly the length of the one that Scott shared with us before, but I thought it had some pretty powerful issues in there. Scott says that he's just catching up on the podcasts, the ones about the Second Constitutional Convention, and he said, yikes, pretty dire stuff, all right. And then he said, your diagnosis seems exactly right, and I wanted to share with you his view on this whole issue. Your diagnosis, he says, seems exactly right. It's the big money oligarchs, the one percenters, who seek to destroy national institutions in order to do to the individual American states what they are happily doing to small countries worldwide. Big oil would love to turn any state containing exploitable resources, be it coal, oil, shale, tar sands, methane-rich shales, etc., into little Uzbekistans, Turkmenistans, Kazakhstans, Nigerias ad nauseum. That's an issue that I asked Scott for permission to share with you because I think it's pretty perceptive. I think it's one that we really need to ponder on for a time. And that is that the state-by-state strategy that those seeking a second convention are pursuing is pretty much the same strategy that we employed in many of our foreign policy exploits around the world in search of oil and other forms of raw material. And so, in a sense, by going at this piecemeal, nation by nation, we were able to be somewhat successful in securing resources, although I'm not sure we were successful in securing the kind of friendships and lasting relationships we hoped that kind of exploitation would bring us. I think one of the things we realize is that there's an awful lot of anti-Americanism in the world. And while we would like, while we like to blame it on the, on the idiocy and self-interest of some of these pretend oligarchs in some of these small countries, the fact of the matter is a lot of the problems that we find we have in the world can be attributed, not exclusively to us, but there's no question we've become part of the problem in many cases. You'll remember we did programs previously on William Appleman Williams's Tragedy of American Diplomacy and talked about the fact that what Williams defined as tragedy is just that the kind of assumptions with which we address the rest of the world, the assumptions that we are the big guy, we are the civilized nation, we are the one that everybody needs to model themselves after. And therefore, because we play such an important role in the world, therefore that gives us rights to move into nations that are much smaller than we are for purposes of trade and commerce, exploitation, whatever, investment, whatever you want to call it. You know, we go in there with kind of an ugly American kind of an attitude sometimes, which I think it tends to hurt us in the long run. One of the books that we looked upon and we considered in some detail was Jeremy Surrey's book, award-winning book called Liberty's Surest Guardian, which is on the whole idea of nation building, and where William Appleman Williams called our foreign policy a tragedy and focused on the issue of exploitation. Jeremy Surrey looks at it from the perspective of nation building, of creating the kinds of nations with the kinds of economic systems and social and political priorities that we have. The assumption being that the greatest foreign policy success that we could experience in terms of our values is to exist in a world populated by nations who buy into many of those same values. In other words, our foreign policy, Surrey points out, has been focused principally on building little United States of Americas around the world and setting up governments that claim and adhere to a commitment to those principles and those values. And the idea being that the more the world becomes to look more and more like us, the better off we are internationally. The more secure we are, the more secure our values are. Thus the whole idea of liberty's surest guardian. And of course, by liberty, he's talking principally about the liberty of free enterprise economic development. And I think, you know, we're not talking about freedom of the press and freedom of speech and all that. Those tend to be secondary. But what Surrey's talking about is developing economic systems, economies that mirror our own, and hopefully develop the kind of interrelationship between our economy and their economy, which builds a degree of dependence. And the idea is the more we can have that, the more secure we are in this world. We know that we've run into problems because, as Surrey himself told us in one of his video presentations during the PRISM West Virginia history grant that we had, if you remember, Surrey made a 2-hour presentation on Skype with us during that session and in the summer, you know, last spring, I believe, in the summer spring of 2013. And you know, what Surrey pointed out is that, you know, if you look through the history of nation building, which he says is in America's DNA, in other words, this has been our strategy in foreign policy from the very beginning. Surrey points out that we've experienced some very, very powerful successes in our foreign policy, but we've also experienced some negatives, some disasters as well. And of course, he looks at Vietnam as a classic example of one of those disasters. And so, you know, Surrey's book is, I think, very, very important. And hopefully, I'm hoping that we can connect with Jeremy and get him to make an appearance with us here at the Virtual Center. But I'd really like to have the website up and be able to give him an idea of where we are and what we're doing and what we've already done before we do that. But be that as it may, that's really what we're talking about. So the the state-by-state strategy that those in search of a second convention seem to be pursuing, Scott in Sweden points out, is very, very similar to the way we've conducted our foreign policy. Instead of going at, the whole enchilada in one hit, so to speak, what those in search of amendments have done is go at it state by state, from the bottom up, so to speak. And as we know, they have been able to garner control over a number of state legislatures and a number of governorships in the process. And in the fall, we were talking about the fact that 26 states had opted not to participate in President Obama's health care program, the Affordable Care Act. And that 26 states, which kind of formed the basis, as it will, formed the basis, if you will, of what becomes the move towards a second convention, has grown by 8 over the last few months, to the point that Michigan in April became the 34th. And now we have the 2/3 states, theoretically, that have requested that Congress convene a constitutional amendment. And John Boehner is wrestling with that issue right now. So I think Scott's perceptive comment about the extent to which the state-by-state strategy is very, very similar to the way we've conducted our foreign policy is pretty much on target. Scott goes on and says, big money is addicted to fast returns on investment. Regulation just get in the way. There's still a lot of money to be made exploiting U.S. territory in the same way that one exploits third world territories. And so what he's talking about is that the more you go this state-by-state issue, the more you divide up power in such a way that it becomes very, very difficult to challenge this strategy. Then he talks about the letters that we looked at from Talk Radio News and Godlike Productions and all the rest of them, about the extremes that make up what we've called the potential for a runaway convention. And then, of course, he makes the statements about the fact that we're dealing with people who are poor. Many of them can't find jobs, and many of them find their political positions are easily manipulated as a result of that. For example, we have right now one of the most interesting, I just wanted to throw this out. I'm not prepared at this point to pursue it in any depth, but I think it's something to think about. We all know that right now the nation is in the midst of this scandal, some people are referring to it, about the VA. And the mock waiting lists that apparently existed, at least in the Phoenix Veterans Administration Hospital, and the fact that one of the physicians, the retired physicians there, blew the whistle and pointed out that a number of people have died waiting to receive service. And so at the same time, what we realize is that they were maintaining phony lists, and the standard, for responding to a veteran's need for medical care is supposed to be 14 days. And so in theory, VA facilities around the country were adhering to this 14-day response time. Turns out that these were phony reports, and that veterans were in fact waiting months, sometimes even over a year, before they were seen. I know personally a vet who passed away this past July that this happened to. He was diagnosed with cancer, and it was lung cancer, and tried to pursue this and deal with it, and kept getting appointments changed and appointments canceled and rescheduled and all the rest of it. It took about 6 months after his diagnosis of lung cancer before he began to receive service. By that time, he was told that the cancer had progressed beyond the point where it was operable. In response to that, his wife got him an appointment at Duke University Medical Center, and he drove to North Carolina and went into Duke, and they confirmed the fact that at this point his cancer had become so far advanced that there was really not much they could do. And he passed away this past July. And, you know, my wife and I were absolutely stunned watching him wait month after month after month for somebody to do something. Of course, we thought that, you know, it may be the nature of the area of the country we're in. Now we're finding out that big cities like Phoenix and Chicago and Boston and many of these other places are experiencing the same kinds of things. And more, this thing is being defined as a scandal. But the point that I'm making here, the point that I want to stress right now, is the extent to which this particular VA situation relates to the Affordable Care Act and potentially relates, indirectly at least, to the call for a second convention. Because there's absolutely no question that for all practical purposes, most of the states who have refused to participate in the Affordable Care Act are states that have called for a second convention. Not all of them, but most of them. Many of them are southern states. They are so-called red states. They have legislatures controlled by Republicans, increasingly Tea Party Republicans. Many of them have governors, Republican governors, some of them Tea Party advocates as well. And the symmetry between the states that refuse to participate in President Obama's Affordable Care Act program and the states which have called for a second constitutional convention on a balanced amendment, the symmetry is very, very close. It's not 100%, but it's very, very close. And so what that suggests is that opposition to President Obama and opposition to his Affordable Care Act may in effect be rearing its head in ways that none of us expected. Many people who supported the Affordable Care Act support universal health care. I happen to be one of those. Were relieved when the Supreme Court found the Affordable Care Act to be constitutional, and became even more relieved once the original website issues were cleared up and people were able to sign up and get on and have their cases reviewed and all the rest of it, so that when the president announced a few weeks ago that there were more than 8 million people registered under the Affordable Care Act, I and a lot of other people I know felt very good about that. And so there's a tendency to assume that, hey, we've gotten over the hump on the Affordable Care Act. Things can't help but get better and better and better. But the fact of the matter is, the degree of opposition to the president and to his programs seems to be reflected in this move towards a second convention, specifically in this move to amend the Constitution in ways that would materially weaken the power of the federal government, weaken the power of the Supreme Courts. And this is the part we really haven't emphasized. And return power more and more in different areas to the states. But keep in mind, we're not talking here in a vacuum. We're not discussing this in a political vacuum. These are states that big money conservatives now control. Proof of that is in their unwillingness to buy into the Affordable Care Act, their unwillingness to expand Medicare, even though it will be paid for for 3 years at least by the federal government. So in a sense, for political and ideological reasons, these state legislatures have chosen to deny their own citizens access to health care, access to the private insurance that would permit them to buy health care. This is the part that we need to recognize. That these state legislatures, which refuse to participate in the Affordable Care Act, refuse to expand their Medicare program in order to make eligible for health care citizens, many of whom never had health care coverage before, many of them who need it desperately. They have chosen for ideological and political reasons to deny health care to their own citizens. And the more we get into this veterans issue, the more we begin to see that many of the people who are being denied this health care are veterans. Because many of the veterans are living below the poverty line, which would mean that while they are eligible for medical services through the VA, they would also be eligible for Medicaid, which would make them eligible to health care under the President's Affordable Care Act program. And indeed, there's now some suggestions that one of the administration's strategies in the VA situation might be to take the pressure off an underfunded VA by finding ways to make many of these veterans eligible for health care through private insurance, like the rest of us who are not veterans are doing. So it turns out then that all of this stuff is linked. And the one variable here, I said vulnerable, but I guess I mean that too. But the one variable here that I think we need to keep in mind is that when these people talk about returning power to the states by giving the states the power to override Supreme Court decisions and denying the president veto power and denying Congress veto power over the states in many ways, and all of these other things that are included in the so-called Liberty Amendments, keep in mind that we're not talking about returning power to the states in the abstract. When we, 200 years after the fact, talked about the Confederation period, when power was in the states, during and immediately after the American Revolution, prior to the Constitutional Convention in 1787, many of us, and that's one of the things that here at the Virtual Senator that I want to address, many of us are talking pretty much in an abstract situation. Many of us are looking at the transition of power from states to federal government and from federal government to states as kind of an abstract philosophical thing rather than a real thing affecting real people in real ways. The fact of the matter is, what we are talking about today when we talk about, for example, a constitutional amendment that would take away the citizens' right to elect their own state senators to the United States Senate, and another amendment that would give state legislatures the power to override Supreme Court decisions, and a third amendment that would subject Supreme Court justices to term limits, as well as the balanced budget amendments. We're not talking about returning power to the state level in the abstract. We are talking about returning power to state legislatures controlled by the Tea Party and funded by big, big, big money. Some of the largest corporations, and there was a study that came out in the Washington Post 10 days ago, that identified some of the largest contributors from the corporate world to political, how many of them support Republicans, how much of their money goes into Republican campaigns, how much of their political money goes into Democratic campaigns. And what you find is that there are certain companies where the vast majority, we're talking 93, 94, 96% of all their political money is going into Republican campaigns. And there are a number of corporations and companies that we all know that were mentioned in that list, that where the amount of, in other words, companies are not dividing up the money equal, where 50% goes to the Republican candidates and 50% to Democrats. There used to be this idea that corporate America would play it safe by contributing to both parties, so that in effect it didn't matter to them which party won, because they had bought influence in both. The fact of the matter is today, while some of that is still going on, the fact of the matter is that the ideological divide between conservatives and liberals, between Democrats and Republicans in today's political world, has become so clearly and carefully defined that ideology is driving where the money goes, not the party label. It's what kinds of policies and programs relating to corporate America are going to come out of a particular candidate, whether it be a Republican or a Democrat, that is driving the where the money goes. And so the fact of the matter is, you have huge companies, multi-billion-dollar companies, corporations, that are pouring money into our political campaigns as a result of Citizens United and the McCutcheon decision decided by the Supreme Court most recently. So the Supreme Court is opening up the possibility for big money to buy influence in our elections. And that's being reflected in the election of novices, political novices, in many states. Candidates who have never run for office before, candidates who have no track record, candidates that you can't get anything negative on if you are an incumbent running against one of these people, because this is the first time out. The only thing they've got is money. And all they need to do to keep that money is make sure that they believe the right thing. And so, in effect, ideology is taking over the political process. And it's being reflected in the number of states that are advocating amendments to the Constitution, which comes very, very close to the very states that are denying health care to their own citizens by refusing to expand Medicare and participate in President Obama's Affordable Care Act. So the irony of the situation, it seems to me, is that opposition to President Obama, opposition to his programs, opposition to the major program being the Affordable Care Act, is being reflected in ways that none of us expected, none of us anticipated, none of us realized. We naively assumed that opposition to the Affordable Care Act only mattered in the areas of health care. Little did we realize that much of that opposition was being channeled into a desire to amend the Constitution substantively. And we've talked in the past about the extent to which Madison, especially, recognized that many of the amendments that were being proposed to the Constitution did not pertain to citizen rights, individual rights, natural rights at all. They were substantive efforts to weaken the central government. And if you think back to our programs recently on Hamilton's position in Federalist 85, Hamilton made the point that there are two kinds of amendments. There are amendments on structure and operation. And then there are amendments that directly affect the power of the central government. Madison made sure when the Bill of Rights was compiled that the amendments included in it did not materially weaken the power of the central government under the Constitution. The amendments focused principally on the rights of individual citizens: free speech, free press, freedom of assembly, right to be secure in your house, in your home, and all the rest of it that are in the Bill of Rights. But the substantive amendments, which would deny Congress the power to tax and would find ways to make Congress more dependent on states, those Madison got out of they were not included in the Bill of Rights. That was submitted to the states for approval. So Hamilton in Federalist 85 correctly states that all the amendments passed heretofore, he anticipates that all the amendments would be amendments related to structure and to issues. They would be safe amendments because they wouldn't materially affect the power relationships between states and the federal government. But the amendments that Mark Levin's talking about in the Liberty Amendments are substantive amendments. They are directly aimed at emasculating the power of the central government and returning power to states which they control. And when you put it all together in those terms, this has the makings of revolution. It has all the symptoms of revolution. And we must see it that way. Because to be very honest with you, that's the way they see it. And if you think back to some of those quotes that we read from the internet about what a second convention will mean, we can abolish NATO, we can abolish debts, we can abolish all the treaties that this government, we can basically put up walls around America and just basically forget that we're part of the world. We can develop as much coal and oil and gas as we want. We don't have to worry about the environment. We don't have to worry about a number of things. And so what we've got is a very, very dangerous, radical situation for our political system. And we darn well better recognize it. And that, I think, was the point that Scott was making in his and again, he raises the question about scared people. That many of the people are voting out of their own self-interest because they're frightened. This morning, for example, I had my senior citizens class, the last one of this academic year. And we were talking about this here in southern West Virginia with the issue of coal. There's absolutely no question, if you are aware of the report that came out 2 weeks ago on climate change. And Tom Friedman was on television this morning, on MSNBC this morning, talking about a series of programs that's going to be on television about the extent to which people throughout the world are already dealing with the realities of climate. It's not something that might happen or is going to happen in the future. It's something that is already happening. And one of the points that Tom Friedman made this morning is that climate changes, specifically a 4-year drought that hit Syria, has been instrumental in the revolutionary situation that has broken out in Syria. Likewise, the situation in Egypt that overthrew Mubarak has climate considerations to it as well. And on and on and on. In other words, the world is changing, and it's not changing for the better, and a lot of it is based on people trying to struggle with the real effects in today's world of climate. And yet here in the United States, less than 40% of those polled believe that climate change is real. Most people believe that it's a hoax, that it's a myth created by the federal government in order to increase taxes or something, or to pursue what here in West Virginia is being called Obama's war on coal. And the fact of the matter is the rest of the world is dealing with the realities of climate, and we're not. And yet, much of what's happened to the climate is directly related to our economy. So again, the implications of the political realities that are happening in this country are surfacing in a number of different ways. There's no question that the number of states we've been talking about calling for a second convention, the states that are controlled, that have become red states, are the same states that are denying climate, and people are voting their pocketbooks. Here in West Virginia, people are being frightened to death. The idea that as the war on coal continues, we're going to lose more and more coal jobs. The West Virginia economy is going to crumble. And we've got to stand up and we've got to basically take back our state from the feds. And that's the strategy. That's the campaign strategy that's being used in many of our local elections for the state legislature here. So again, it seems to me all of this is related, and it's very, very important. And again, it's unfair to blame it on ignorance. It's not ignorance, it's fear. In fact, Scott makes the point and said it's hard to know the line. It's hard to know where to draw the line between ignorance and stupidity. But then he says, the way I figure it, given enough ignorance, the result will be stupidity. So that's the kind of thing, it seems to me, that we're dealing with. Very, very important stuff. Anyway, I mentioned that while in Kansas I was summarizing programs. So let me share with you. The last two programs we did were on this issue of the Second Convention. The two programs in question were Monday, May 5th and Tuesday, May 6th. And those happened to be the last two programs we did. So let me share with you what I wrote on those programs. This is the kind of summary that I'm trying to do on previous programs. Monday, May 5th, 2014. The Second Convention, Federalist 85, George Will, Mark Levin's Liberty Amendments, and America's Founders. That's the theme of the program. A detailed analysis of Federalist 85 to include George Will's cherry-picked quotations from it on state power and Hamilton's final paragraph, arguing about the dangers of a second convention. George Will's case for a state compact to focus on a draft balanced budget amendment formulated by the Goldwater Institute and to prevent a runaway convention is addressed. The 1787 convention, the Constitutional Convention, as a runaway convention was addressed as well. Extensive quotations from internet sources, God Life Resources, and Talk Radio News on what political goals can be realized through a second convention. The second hour of the program is key. It uses Federalist 85 to prove that Levin, George Will, and others are turning the founders on their heads by converting them from opponents to substantive amendments they hope to secure in a second convention into their allies in favor of state power. This is one of the more poignant programs in our series. The final 15 minutes of the second hour is a direct challenge to conservatives for their willingness to lie and cheat in order to secure a second convention. Thus, the call to reason together cannot be taken seriously. We must expose, we must fight. So that's basically the summary of our May 5th program. Then the next day, we spent a lot of time on the same thing, reviewing that, and this is what I've said on Tuesday, May 6th. The threat of a second convention continued. The challenge of fairness to citations of George Will. Conservative response to the dangers of a second convention built upon the popularity of a balanced budget amendment. The beginnings of a detailed assessment of Mark Levin's Liberty Amendments. The case for conservative plans to undertake a runaway convention. A conscious effort to reassure doubters that the Constitution is safe from a runaway convention. This is the same strategy that Federalists employed by even adding the Second Convention amendment mechanism as a political sop to those most concerned about federal power under the Constitution. Hamilton advocates ratification before amendments as a way to channel efforts to amend the Constitution into structure and organization and not make it about federal power. The second hour is a quick review of the substance of each of the Mark Levin amendments. And so I'm hoping that over time I can build those kinds of summaries to each of our programs so that our archives will not just include the date, but will include a paragraph as well as to what the substantive content of that particular program is all about. One of the things that I found in my review, we have 5 minutes left in our first hour here, so I don't want to begin anything new now and then have to break. So let me just share this with you in a couple of minutes. One of the programs I randomly picked was April 29th, 2014, which is just about 2.5, 3 weeks ago. And I mentioned in the summary that this particular program opens with a response to a listener's email on the so-called Powell Memorandum in the early 70s on a plea to chambers of commerce to counterattack those who inflame college campuses with attacks on free enterprise. In a sense, one of the things that we're seeing is the fruit of the Powell Amendment written in the early 1970s. You'll remember that we effectively read that amendment here at the Virtual Center. And it was written by Lewis Powell in Richmond, Virginia, before he was appointed to the Supreme Court. In response to an email that I got about how could he be appointed to the Supreme Court after writing such a politically charged amendment, the fact of the matter is, not amendment, memorandum is what I meant. The fact of the matter is it was a secret memorandum. It was written directly to a close friend of Lewis Powell's, who was chairman of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. It was not for public consumption. What I'm saying is that there's every evidence in the world that members of the United States Senate, when they confirmed Lewis Powell for the Supreme Court, had no idea that this memorandum existed. If they did, it would have become a political football, and Powell's nomination would have been in jeopardy. Fact of the matter is, Powell's nomination rode through the Senate very, very smoothly because Powell was seen as a moderate. Both sides had concerns about him, but he was seen as fair and judicially minded and honest. If you read the Powell Memorandum, however, it's very clear that what he's talking about is a conscious effort by big business, by corporate America, to counterattack the challenges to free enterprise, especially as these were happening on our college campuses. Basically, what he called for was the massive influx of big money into our political system. We've got 2 minutes left in this first hour. Let's end it with this. Hear this. In the early 70s, Lewis Powell, in a secret memorandum to the Chamber of Commerce in Washington, urged corporate America and big money to begin to pour more and more money into a counterattack to defend free enterprise against liberals who were controlling the college campuses, college and university campuses throughout the nation. The strategies that are being employed to engage in that counterattack, the strategies being employed to potentially bring together a second convention to amend the Constitution of the United States and weaken the federal government in order to destroy its ability to regulate corporate behavior, was a game plan laid out in the early 70s by Lewis Powell. it is absolutely vital that we appreciate it and understand it, because all of it is connected to the move for a second convention, opposition to the Affordable Care Act, where political campaign money is going into in the fall elections to come, and the role that the Supreme Court has played in making all of this possible. Justice Roberts, Chief Justice Roberts, there's absolutely no question, is very, very aware of what this counterattack needed to encompass. And he has been responsible in large part for making a lot of it possible with Supreme Court decisions like Citizens United and McCutcheon. Again, I think all of us need to appreciate this. We're going to pause for 5 minutes and take a break. We'll be back with our second hour. I urge you to stay with us. We'll be right back. Thank you. Welcome back to the second hour of the Virtual Center. This is Bill O'Brien, and thanking you. If you've been with us since the beginning of our program 1 hour ago, thank you for staying with us. That says an awful lot. If you have been with us for an hour and you're still with us, then you're basically kind of giving us a little bit of a vote of confidence. At least I choose to interpret it that way, and I hope that that's more true than maybe it sounds. If you are just joining us, welcome to today's program. In our first hour, we kind of reviewed a little bit. I talked about some of the experiences I had while I was off for 2 weeks driving through the Midwest, and we talked a little bit about the previous programs and the idea of the second convention, and reviewed a lot of that, and talked about Mark Levin's books, and many of the program. Much of this is review for what we were doing early in May during our last time together. So here in the second hour, I'd like to get into something a little bit different, and I hope it meets with your with your approval. And again, we invite you to participate in our program and share your thoughts, your ideas, your concerns, your considerations, your questions, your criticisms, whatever they might be, with our audience. I ask you to think about and recognize the fact that if you think about your own interests and what brings you to the table here at the Virtual Center and on the H.O.R.N Radio Network generally, then you have to assume, I believe, that most of the other people who are tuned in are thinking the same way you are. They're looking for the same kinds of things. And what that means is they will benefit, every one of them, from hearing what you've got to say. And so we encourage you to participate actively in our program. We have a phone number. It's there just for you. And the number is area code 304-658-3333. That's 304-658-3333. If you'd like to communicate with me directly on some of these issues, I would love to hear from you. We spend a little bit of time in our first hour talking about an email I received from Sweden, from Scott. I look forward to receiving word from you as well. My email address is waobrien906@gmail.com. That's waobrien906, all one word, @gmail.com. I mentioned that I wanted to change gears a little bit here in our second hour. I have something in mind for tomorrow's program, which I think I could probably mention right now. I've received emails from a number of you in the last couple of weeks about a new book by Justice Stevens on 6 amendments that he proposed to the Constitution of the United States. And the attention that we've been giving to the efforts to call a second convention for purposes of amending the Constitution may have poisoned the environment, so to speak, about the whole issue of amendments at all. But the fact of the matter is our Constitution still contains a procedure for amendment. And it's in that context that Justice Stevens writes his book. I'd like to spend a little bit of time tomorrow on Justice Stevens' approach to amending the Constitution and to compare it with the Liberty Amendments, not only in terms of content, but in terms of strategy and ideology. I think there's quite a bit there, food for thought. And I think all of it relates directly to the Constitution of the United States as it evolves here in the early 21st century. Therefore, all of us need to know about it. So that'll be tomorrow. But what I'd like to deal with in our second hour today is a program that we talked about some time ago, and we haven't talked about it that much recently, but I wanted to review it. And it's about a class, a college credit class that we're developing here in southern West Virginia that we're planning to offer in our local high schools starting this coming fall, this fall of 2014. We had put this program together with the idea that we could run it last year. But the fact of the matter is the start of school came upon us so quickly. We needed to get the word out to parents so that they would have an opportunity to register their children in this kind of a course. And that meant that they really needed to understand what it was all about, because it wasn't going to be free. And the fact of the matter is, as push came to shove, we began to realize that time was becoming more and more of a factor. And as the school year progressed, the window on the opportunity to run a course like this was closing. The less time we had, the more concentrated the focus on the course became. And the more concentrated that focus became, the less opportunities there were for the kind of interaction and student work that we believe is going to be the basis for whether in fact this course is successful or not. So finally what we decided to do, we even thought about maybe running it just the spring semester, from Christmas holidays up through now, the close of school. But that would take a program that was developed to run an entire year and compress it into a half a year. And that meant that students would spend more time on this class. This would be a class over and above their regular class schedule. And to ask students to do that, and then ask them, because of the pressures of time, to put in more hours in a shorter period of time than the program was designed to accommodate, seemed a little bit self-defeating. And then, of course, there's the issue of the teachers. We're asking teachers, over and above their regular teaching load, to participate in this program and work directly with me. We have teachers who have agreed to do that, but they're giving up their time and effort. It's not fair to compress the time in such a way that it becomes a burden on them. So what we decided to do early this spring was to postpone the effort, concentrate on beginning it in the fall of 2014. Spread it over the entire year. The course would run from September all the way through April of 2015. That would mean, because there are 8 months involved in the course, that would mean that we can spread it out in such a way that the meetings can be spread out, so that the course doesn't become a burden on anybody. It becomes an opportunity rather than a problem. So with that in mind, I spent over this past weekend, the holiday weekend, time drafting a flyer, a one-page announcement that we're hoping we can send to parents and students who will be enrolling this coming fall. Specifically, we're targeting high school juniors and seniors. I know that we're going to have parents who call and say, my son or my daughter is only a sophomore, but she's awfully bright, and, you know, blah, 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 blah. And I figured that, you know, given the kinds of things we're going to be asking these students to do, if we go into the 10th grade, down to the 10th grade, we're dealing with people that probably haven't even reached 16 years old. And the result is that we may be asking more from them than it's fair to expect. So with that in mind, we're limiting this to high school juniors and seniors. And the kinds of skills that we're focusing on, we anticipate will be the kinds of skills that older juniors and seniors will be able to handle and understand and be able to perfect. These are the same skills that are required on the college boards. Here in West Virginia, it's the ACT exam. And here in West Virginia, our students, many of them, are under a real cloud when it comes to performing well on the ACT exam. We know, and I'm not going to be critical and get into all of this at this point, but we know that in some of the larger metropolitan areas, in New York and Baltimore and Washington and Boston and many of these other places, Chicago and LA and many of these other places, private companies have come into existence, and they offer ACT and SAT prep courses, which are very expensive. In other words, wealthy parents can afford to pay $500 or $1,000 for a prep class in how to do well and improve your score on the college boards. Most kids can't afford to take that kind of a class. And so the fact of the matter is, we have a lot of youngsters who go into the college boards and take them at a distinct disadvantage because they haven't had the advantages that other students taking the same exam have had. This course we are envisioning as an ACT prep class as well. The kinds of skills that we're going to be focusing on are the kinds of skills that will help students in the language portion of the college boards, or the ACT in this case. So I thought that I would take some time today here, because you all know what we're doing and what we're trying to do better than anybody else, because we've been doing it now for close to 15 months. And I thought I would spend time sharing with you the content of this flyer and ask you for your feedback. And I mean that. If you don't want to call, then feel comfortable sending me an email. My email, again, is waobrien906@gmail.com. Our phone number, area code 304-658-3333. If you've got something to suggest that would improve this program, or if you see something in it that doesn't sound right or sounds like it might be a negative, I've tried to go into this with the most positive, idealistic attitude in the world. In fact, some of the people I've shared this with have already indicated to me, you may be assuming a lot more than you're going to get. But I think in anything new, you have to go into it that way. You have to be positive. And so I'm trying to be positive. What I'm suggesting to students who would enroll in this course is that this is one of life's few win-win situations. You can't lose on this, is what I'm suggesting. So let me share the contents of this with you, and then I can elaborate a little bit on it. And if you have something to add to it or to point out about it that I didn't see, then I would really appreciate your input. And in anticipation of that, let me make sure that I thank you now. The title of this is because the University of Charleston here in West Virginia is going to award the 3 credits. The University of Charleston presents Foundations of the American Republic, a 3-credit college class for high school juniors and seniors, 2014-2015. So we're entitling this course Foundations of the American Republic. And here's the introductory paragraph. This course seeks to strengthen our appreciation for the ideals, values, intent, and principles of America's founders. These foundations of the American Republic are just that. The keys to America's story as told by the founders themselves in letters they wrote, speeches they delivered, laws they drafted, and personal journals they kept. This is a history class like no other you've ever taken. But it's much more than that. In doing history, we will learn what performing in a college class and doing that well is really all about. We'll learn what colleges expect from us, and we'll learn how to meet those standards. The goal here is to educate everybody. We'll set the bar pretty high. You'll know what's expected. You'll learn how to deliver. How well you do in this class will be measured by whether or not you choose to do the work. If you want to succeed, we'll show you how to do it. If you don't, then we trust that you'll understand if we spend our time with those who do. It's your call. Will you join us? Besides the whats of history, you'll learn the hows as well. How to read critically, how to analyze information, how to recognize spin, how to write persuasively, how to separate the important from the less important, how to develop an argument, and how to win it. This class will help prepare you for the ACT test and for what lies beyond it. There's more to this than any of us can imagine. This is the part of this which I'm most hopeful and very honestly proud about, is the degree of community support we're getting for this. There's more to this than any of us can imagine. The University of Charleston has given us a very special tuition rate for this 3-credit university class. $216 for 3-credit class. The university's regular tuition rate for a 3-credit class is $960. They're charging us $216. The Beckley Rotary Club will pay 50% of every student's tuition. And the Beckley-Raleigh County Chamber of Commerce is partnering in this effort as well. Bottom line, there are a whole lot of folks in this community who will have your back in this effort. I'm obviously talking to students. There are a whole lot of folks in the community who will have your back in this effort. Will you join us? Please think this through carefully. We want you with us, but only if you're willing to give this your best. And you don't have to be an academic all-star either. Mostly B's and C's in your classes so far? Perfect. We'll help you turn those good, even okay grades into better ones. This class will happen at your school at a time convenient to you. Some of it will be delivered via interactive video. Most of it will be with a teacher you know and respect. The class will run September through April, with 2 meetings each week. That, at this point, is debatable. Right now, you must decide whether you'll join us. Then, let your principal know. We'll take care of the rest. That's the flyer. That's what parents are going to get. I'm guessing that parents will have questions. And I've developed a much more detailed explanation of what the objectives of the course are and what we'll be covering and all the rest of it. But I think that the key issue that parents are going to be interested in is the $108 tuition fee for a 3-credit class. Let me point out a couple of things about this flyer, the information related to this course that I think is significant. First of all, I mentioned in there and bolded, it's full of underlines and everything else, but basically what I said is the goal here is to educate everybody. It's a flyer. I can't go into details about that. But this is what I mean by educating everybody. Most of us know that in traditional education, traditional classes, it doesn't take long for most classes to begin to focus on the best students, on the few. Those who have the skills and the ability and the interest to really become active and participants in a class. And those students who don't have it fall by the wayside. Many of them hang in there, they do the best they can, they end up getting C's and D's and B minuses and various other things. They're able to do enough to pass, but they really don't get anything out of the class. This one is different. We do not anticipate letting anybody fail this class. If students start to miss classes or not turn in assignments, we're going to reserve the right to dismiss them from the program. We're paying half their tuition, and their parents are paying the other half. It seems to me they have responsibilities to other people. If they choose not to fulfill those responsibilities, then we can't afford to devote valuable time to them that we could be spending with students who are really giving it a serious go. So when we say educating everybody, we mean it. The purpose here is not to get an A. The purpose here is to learn how to do what we're going to try to show them and teach them how to do. The purpose is to learn the skills, the how-tos associated with success at the college level. I've been teaching college and university classes for 50 years. And the one thing I've learned, especially during the last half of this, most of it's been in West Virginia. Of the 50 years that I've been teaching, 25 of them have been here in West Virginia. And the one thing I've learned, not only by being here, but by being in other places as well, is that our students are as bright and as creative as students anywhere. What they lack are the skills. I'm going to say this in ways which I understand. Please don't misinterpret what I'm saying. One of the things I've realized is that our students here in the mountains in West Virginia lack the sophistication. They don't come from backgrounds that are college-educated backgrounds. Most of them are first generation. Nobody in their family ever went to college. Many of them come from families where nobody even graduated from high school. They don't know how the game is played. And by I use the term game advisedly. But there's a way to do this. There are strategies. There are ways to study and ways to be successful. And those from better, wealthier, more affluent backgrounds are schooled in those strategies before they ever enter the college classroom. Consequently, they take off and they run, they take off right away and they run with the program, so to speak. And one of the things I've noticed about many of our students is they lack the sophistication and they lack the skills. They don't really understand what it is they're supposed to be doing. They're failing and they don't know why. And more often than not, by the time they begin to figure out what's going on, it's too late. Here in West Virginia, the numbers tell us that 10% of our entering freshman students never return for a second semester. Some of them don't even make it through mid-semester, midterms. In the college that I've been associated with here in southern West Virginia for many years, which is Concord University, which is a darn good school, we lose 6 or 7% of our entering freshman class by the start of the third week. Because many of our instructors are really unprepared for the lack of sophistication of many of their students. Our people have come from places where you give students a book and a syllabus and say, this is what's expected of you. Our first exam will be in 3 weeks. You're responsible for these chapters and this reading and this material. And then it's up to you. And consequently, large numbers of students come in and can't do it. They don't do it. And many of them don't do it because they don't know what they're doing. They don't know why, you know, what's expected of them. They don't, I mean, they say they know how to study, but they really don't. Many of them can't read, at least at the level that we're talking about. We're talking about critical reading here. Many of them have never had the experience to read like that. They read for information. And reading for information is elementary reading level only. It's like reading how-to manuals. The assumption is that every piece of information that you read is news. And so the whole purpose of most of the books that our students read are exposing them to new information that they've never seen before. So consequently, students have no option but to assume that what they're supposed to do is memorize all this information. Many of them can't do it, won't do it, refuse to do it. And the fact that there are skills, there are ways to handle this information and ways to organize it and ways to separate the important information from the stuff that's not quite as important. One of the most important tools that students today use in college, especially in freshman and sophomore level courses, are highlighters. They highlight the textbook. They highlight the important points in the textbook. More and more you find out, if you look at the textbooks that our students have, that there'll either be nothing highlighted or everything will be highlighted. It's almost like they went at the page with a paintbrush. And what that tells you is they really don't know what they're after. They don't know what the important information is. They don't know what they're supposed to know. And we don't know how to tell them. Most people teaching in college don't know how to tell them. They're experts in their field. They know their stuff. But they're used to dealing with students who know how the game works. And our students don't. They can't afford the courses run by Kaplan and some of these other places for $1,000 for ACT preps. So consequently, they get 14s and 15s and 17s and 19s on the ACT. The average ACT score in West Virginia entering freshmen is 21 point something. I mentioned that on our trip west, we spent a couple of days in St. Louis. And I spent time with my good friend who is the dean of the Honors College at the University of Missouri in St. Louis. And Bob was telling us the minimum entering ACT score to the University of Missouri is 24. Highest maximum perfect score is 36. They expect entering freshmen to at least score 24 on the ACT. In West Virginia, the average score statewide is 21. At Concord, if we required 24 ACT for admission, 3/4 of our students wouldn't even get in. So we have to admit, in order to maintain the institution, we have to admit students with 18s and 19s and 17s. And particular departments, I know our math people, for example, have established a principle where if a student gets less than a 19 in math on the ACT, they have to pass another test. Even though they're admitted to the institution, they have to pass another test. And if they don't pass it, then we require that they take a full year of what we call developmental math, which is review math. Students call it bonehead math, where you go all the way back to addition and multiplication tables and subtraction and fractions to decimals and all that stuff. So if a student gets less than a 19 in math on the ACT, they have to take developmental math. Over 40% of our entering freshmen are required to do that. Almost 1 out of every 2 students are required to take developmental math or developmental English, or both. You can imagine how a student who didn't grow up in a college household, in a college-educated household, how a student is going to respond when, knees shaking, he enters college for the first time and finds out that he's going to have to take developmental English and developmental math. He's going to have to relearn arithmetic and basic reading and sentence structure and capitals and commas and italics and all the rest of it. It's defeating. It's defeating for adults that have been out there in the work world for 10 or more years and come back to school and then find out they have to take math that they had in the 3rd grade 40 years ago that they can't remember. So what that means is that many of them give up. And the result is that we see large proportions of our freshman class withdraw through the year. So then you begin to look at who returns the second year. How many of these entering freshmen come back for the second year? And you find out, college after college, it's no particular criticism of any institution, but you look at many of them, and there's a 35% attrition rate, 40%. So what that means is we're recruiting a whole new group of incoming freshmen every year and losing half of them the first year. And that's happening everywhere, not just at one institution, it's happening everywhere. I think it's understandable why some institutions lower their standards in order to keep these students in school. And that, I think we would all appreciate, is a solution worse than is a cure worse than the disease. If you lower your standards, then your degree becomes meaningless. And students are walking around with college degrees, many of them who can't read. and they can't get jobs and they can't perform on the job, and then they feel like college was a crock and that they were cheated and lied to, and now they're in debt for a degree that's useless to them because they can't get a job with it anyway. I would suggest to you these are problems that our colleges and universities, that our education system has gotten into for many years. This stuff isn't new. This course is. Because what we're promising here is to educate everybody. We're not going to let 2/3 of the class just sit by and take up space. We're talking about requiring them to turn in work all the time, regularly. Every week they'll be turning in written work. The most important thing about this is that, and this is the point that we're going to make from the very beginning to all of our students, you are not in competition with anybody. All you need to worry about in this course is you. You're going to complete so much, we're going to require so much work of you that we're going to have a record of your progress. We're going to know where you started. We're going to know what you learned. We're going to know the areas that are giving you the most difficulty. We're going to know where you need the most help. And we're going to be able to chart your progress from beginning to end. And your grade is going to be based on that progress, not on what others know or don't know. You're not in competition with anybody else. You're in competition only with yourself. What we are anticipating is that we will be able to remove the idea that you're up against the students who always get the A's, because they know how the game is played. So that's why the appeal in this flyer to students who are getting B's and C's. Our purpose here is to teach people what they need to know in order to be successful in college. Whether they choose to go or not choose to go is their call. But we want that choice to be theirs, not some admissions officer who's comparing ACT scores or college board scores and making life decisions for kids based on numbers. We want everybody to come in and everybody to have a chance. The only thing we have to have is cooperation, is willingness of the students to work with us. If they're willing to give it to us, we'll try to make a go of it. So that's why I've emphasized here, you've got, as a student, you've got the decisions to make. This entire community is behind you. We're even half paying for it, because we realize that your success is our success. The quality of life in this part of the country depends on the quality of education we're able to deliver to these kids. And so we've got to get rid of some of these old habits and these old assumptions and all the rest of it that have governed our school systems and start all over again. And the fact that we've got Chamber of Commerce support and Rotary Club support and the University of Charleston support and all the rest of it means that this community is wagering an awful lot on the success of this program. It's intimidating in many ways for me, but at the same time, this is probably going to be my last big thing. And I'm excited about it because it's something I've always wanted to do. It's something I firmly believe in. And a lot of it's personal. When I went to graduate school, I ended up going to one of the best graduate schools in American history in the country, the University of Wisconsin. It had one of the best history departments in the country. Still does. I had no idea what I was doing. I had a college degree from a teacher's college in Boston. I was intimidated about the thought of going into high school and teaching history because I didn't really feel that I knew any. I took a lot of education classes and a lot of methods classes and a lot of classes in how to structure an exam and how to manage a class and all this other stuff. But I didn't know any history. At least I didn't think I did. And so I applied to graduate school mainly because I wanted to learn some history. Turns out that I applied to one of the best in the country. I didn't know that. I went to the chairman of our history department in Boston, told him that I wanted to go to a graduate program in history. I didn't want to take any more education classes. I wanted to learn some history so I could teach it. And without ever breaking sweat, without even turning around, he reached behind him in a cabinet where he had all these college catalogs, and he grabbed the top 3. And he pulled out 3 catalogs and didn't even look at them, and handed them to me, and he says, "Here's 3 good ones." And I looked at the 3 catalogs he gave me. One of them was Wisconsin. One of them was Harvard. And one of them was Boston University. Excuse me, it wasn't Boston University, it was the University of Ohio in Athens, Ohio. This happened in 1965. So, I mean, it's 40 some odd years ago. But it was the University of Ohio, University of Wisconsin, and Harvard were the 3. I applied to all of them because I didn't know one from the other. I ended up going to Wisconsin because I got a scholarship. I got into them. I got into Harvard, but I was going to have to pay my own way. Well, that was a joke. I mean, there's no way. I got into the University of Ohio, and because it was a rural college, a rural institution, one of the faculty members that we had at our college graduated from there. And she said, "Growing up in Boston, you probably won't like it. It's too rural." Well, and here I am in southern West Virginia, but that's beside the point. So I didn't go there. I got in, but I didn't go there. And I went to Wisconsin because I had a scholarship. And the first day that we were on campus at the university, we received instructions after we registered to go meet our program advisors, and I went and met mine. Turned out one of the people who probably influenced my life more than anybody else. I mean, one of the biggest influences on my life I've ever had. But anyway, when I met him, he stood up and shook my hand and introduced himself and said, "Bill, it's been years since we've had a graduate student from Boston College here in the seminar." And I said, "Professor Jensen, I'm sorry, but I think you made a mistake. I didn't graduate from Boston College. I graduated from Boston State College." And he said, "What the hell is that?" And I said, "It's a teacher's college." And he said, "What in the name of God are you doing here?" At that point, I realized that I was admitted and received my scholarship by mistake. They thought I graduated from somewhere else. And I suddenly realized that I was in an environment that I didn't know anything about. I had no background. And when we ended up going to seminar, and Professor Jensen had everybody introduce themselves the first day, we had students from Johns Hopkins and I can't name, the University of California at Berkeley, the University of Texas, the University of Minnesota. I mean, just on and on where these places, where these graduate students had come from. And when it came my turn to introduce myself, I was about to say Boston State College. And Jensen intervened and said, folks, I really want you to meet Bill. Because he's here, he graduated from a teacher's college. And he's here because he wants to see how the other half lives. And I realized then that I was totally out of my element. And I realized that I probably was not going to be long for the world, for that world, unless I really sucked it up. And I apparently did. But the point is, I can relate because I've been there. I know what it's like to be thrown into a situation when there are rules and there are ways to play the game and you don't even know what the game is. So I'm hoping that we're going to be able to do some things that will be effective. I wasn't kidding at the beginning of this hour when I said I solicit your input. If you have suggestions on things that I could include in this flyer that would be more important, I don't want to get into all of this details in writing by any means. Students will find out a lot of this stuff quickly enough. But the fact of the matter is, if we only get 10 or 15 students, then for all practical purposes, the thrill's gone. It's a failure. I'm hoping we'll get 50 students or 70 students. We're operating with 5 or 6 high schools here. And if we can get 5 or 8 or 10 or whatever from each of the different schools, we should end up with 40 or 50 students. So that's kind of what I'm hoping for. And if we don't succeed, if we don't do that, then it's not that exciting because we're not going to have that much of an impact. And what is it we're going to be doing? I mentioned in the last hour that while in Kansas, I was looking at archived programs, listening, going back over programs that we've done previously here at the Virtual Center. And I began to use the White Rose Society archives for the first time. Many of you use them all the time, I understand that. And if you go online to White Rose, you will find that there's an introduction on the White Rose Society webpage, which is a quote from Samuel Adams at the time of the American Revolution. It is an excerpt from a speech that Sam Adams delivered at the Philadelphia State House on the 1st of August, 1776. Put this into context a little bit. Declaration of Independence, July 2nd. Approved by Congress on July 4th, 1776. This is August 1st. It's 3 weeks later. Turns out that August 1st is the day before the parchment version of the Declaration of Independence that all of the members of the Continental Congress signed, those that were willing to sign. That happened on August 2nd. So Samuel Adams delivered this speech on the front steps of the Philadelphia State House, the day before the members of Continental Congress were going to go in and sign the Declaration of Independence. Put their name on it. Identify themselves as traitors in rebellion against the legitimate government of Great Britain. You can understand why many of these people were reluctant to sign. In this speech, Adams said the following, and this is the introductory paragraph of the White Rose Society. If ye love wealth better than liberty, the tranquility of servitude better than the animating contest of freedom, go home from us in peace. We ask not your counsel or arms. Crouch down and lick the hands which feed you. May your chains set lightly upon you, and may posterity forget that ye were our countrymen. We only have 5 minutes left, so let me read that again. If ye love wealth better than liberty, the tranquility of servitude better than the animating contest of freedom, go home from us in peace. We ask not your counsels or arms. Crouch down and lick the hands that feed you. May your chains set lightly upon you, and may posterity forget that ye were our countrymen. The reason why I decided to excerpt this particular passage is because it appears on the White Rose Society website. I want to spend a moment dissecting this in order to explain what it says. Because what it says is very important. If you prefer wealth over freedom, if you prefer the tranquility, the peace, and stability of servitude more than the animation and excitement that goes with being free, then go home. If you're afraid to engage in this movement for independence because you don't want to disturb what you've got now, if you're willing to continue in a state of servitude, licking the hands of those that feed you, if you prefer that over being free, then leave. We don't want you. We don't want your counsel. We don't want your arms. In other words, we don't want you to participate in the army, to militarily take up arms against Great Britain. We wish the best for you. May your chains set lightly upon you. And may posterity, in other words, those that come after us, never know that you were even our countrymen. What Sam Adams is saying in this quote is it's time to make a decision. No more middle of the road, no more moderate, no more let me think about it, no more let me come back tomorrow, no more let me call a friend. It's time to make a choice. If you're willing to support what you have now and not go after what independence promises us, then so be it. Do that. Leave. Go home. The only thing we want to make sure of is that those who come after us never know that you were even part of us, one of our countrymen. The fact of the matter is, this short passage is part of a speech that when you print it out is 10 pages long. This passage, without the context it's in, is meaningless. What we've got to do is dissect this passage in order to understand the context. That requires critical thinking. It requires analysis. It requires reflection. It requires reading in a way that most people never read before. That's what we're about. That's what we'll be doing. It is 59 minutes after the hour. I know Bob Kincaid's program is about ready to fire up on the H.O.R.N radio network, so it's time for us to get out of here. For the Virtual Center, let me thank you, bid you good evening, and be safe. Thank you.